Number 8. Operation Bodenplatte. On January 1, 1945, during the Battle of the Bulge, the Luftwaffe launched an attempt to cripple Allied air forces in the Low Countries, codenamed Operation Bodenplatte, or Baseplate. The mission was also carried out in an effort to enable the German Army and the Waffen-SS to resume their advance during a stagnant stage of the ongoing battle. After numerous weather-related delays, the operation commenced at the first possible opportunity, which happened to be on New Year's Day. Allied intelligence noticed the buildup of German air forces in the days leading up to Operation Bodenplatte, but failed to detect an imminent attack. These failures stemmed partially from the decision to disregard certain intercepted communications and the decision not to make a written note after observing the Germans stockpiling flares and smoke bombs. Another crucial mistake occurred when the Allies misinterpreted German instructions to fighter pilots regarding the use of flares as preparation for a ground support mission. Several more indicators of an upcoming attack were either overlooked or missed, making it clear in hindsight that the Allies could have done a lot more to prepare for what was to come. But the outcome of the situation could have also arguably been much worse. On the day of the attack, more than 1,000 German fighters and bombers attacked Allied air bases in Europe. While the Germans managed to destroy 156 Allied aircraft, they lost 277 of their own aircraft, some at the hands of their own naval and ground forces, who were unaware of the highly secretive mission. The operation came at a far higher cost than it was worth, and the German losses were one of several factors that the Allies considered before ceasing their efforts to destroy the Luftwaffe. In other words, the Germans did a lot of the work for the Allies via their failed operation. Number 7. The Nazi Wooden Jet Fighter. As the Allies encroached on Germany toward the end of 1944, the Nazis began to frantically brainstorm in an effort to develop a wonder weapon that might reverse their severely weakened position. They developed several aircraft under what is known as the Emergency Fighter Program, including the Heinkel HE-162. Popularly known as the Volksjäger, or People's Fighter, the hastily constructed single-engine plane went from the design to the production stage in just 69 days. It was made mostly from wood due to metal shortages, and the assembly required only semi-skilled labor. Several fatal accidents occurred during test flights, but the Germans continued scrambling to refine the Volksjäger and get it rolling off the production line. And while they touted it as an excellent fighter, it was fraught with problems. The plane had a top-mounted engine, which made it difficult for pilots to bail without hitting the engine. Because of the aircraft's small size, there was little room for fuel, which didn't combine well with the fact that the engine was inefficient to begin with. The Volksjäger was built at several facilities. Engines and subassemblies were built at an underground forced labor factory in Hinterbrühl, but the planes themselves were assembled elsewhere. The Luftwaffe initially planned to build 4,000 Volksjägers, but by the time manufacturing began in early 1945, Germany was clearly losing the war, and the effort was essentially pointless. Only about 320 of the planes were ever produced, and less than 200 were delivered by the war's end. Number 6. Operation Mincemeat. In April 1943, a dead man dressed as a Royal British Marine appeared in the water off the coast of Spain with a suspicious-looking briefcase attached to his wrist. Naturally, the discovery piqued the Germans' interest, and they conspired with pro-Nazi factions of the Spanish military to gain access to the briefcase. In it, they found documents outlining an Allied plot to invade German-occupied Sardinia and Greece. At the time, Spain was under the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, who declared a policy of neutrality in the war. Spanish officials shared the documents with the Germans, then returned them to the British, who discovered through a forensic analysis that the papers had been handled and most likely read. Little did the Nazis know, the dead man wasn't a British soldier at all. He was a vagabond named Glyndŵr Michael, who had died from eating rat poison. The British military had dressed his corpse as a Royal Marines officer, complete with a fake ID identifying him as Captain William Martin, and filled the briefcase with fake documents meant to mislead the Germans. Dubbed Operation Mincemeat, the plan's purpose was to make the Nazis think that they had stumbled upon valuable intel. A British submarine deposited the fictitious officer's body in the bogus paperwork in the Mediterranean Sea and waited for the results to unfold. The plan worked beautifully. Not only did the Nazis think they had gotten their hands on important information, they thought they had done so without the British realizing it. In anticipation of the attack detailed in the phony paperwork, Hitler dispatched tank divisions and other forces to Greece. Meanwhile, around 160,000 Allied troops invaded Sicily, catching the Germans totally off guard. Number 5. Operation Gunnerside. One of the key ingredients the Germans used in their attempts to develop an atomic bomb was a heavy hydrogen isotope called deuterium oxide, or D20, also known as heavy water. After invading Norway in 1940, the Nazis took control of the Norsk Hydro-Vermork plant. They forced workers to speed up the manufacture of this mysterious but crucial component, which the Americans never used, and which played a role in atomic bomb production that is scarcely understood even today. In 1941, Norwegian chemist Leif Tronstad contacted British intelligence and informed them of the Germans' demands for increased heavy water production. Suspecting the Nazis were developing nuclear weapons, the British immediately got to work planning a sabotage mission. In the meantime, Tronstad fled Norway for Sweden. From there, he proceeded to Britain, where he was tasked with training commando units for what became known as Operation Gunnerside. Norwegian recruits underwent weeks of intensive outdoor training to ready themselves for the mission. This was necessary because it wasn't going to be easy to reach the Vemork plant, which was located in a frigid environment and surrounded by a high mountain plateau. Tronstad advised the operations planners against bombing the facility, warning that if a bomb were to hit the plant's liquid ammonia storage tanks, it would endanger civilians. A bomb also did not guarantee the destruction of the heavy water supply, which was kept in the basement. The Norwegian recruits parachuted into the area under the cover of night on February 27, 1943. To reach the plant, they descended to the bottom of a gorge, crossed a freezing cold river, and climbed up a 500-foot cliff. They broke into the property through a side gate using wire cutters, at which point the delicate operation commenced. 2 team members entered the building through a side tunnel and laid explosive charges near the heavy water supply. They lit the fuses, hightailed it out of the vicinity, and soon heard the sound of a satisfying boom coming from within. The most important part of their job was done. The Vemork facility was destroyed, and they could now start the final leg of their mission, skiing more than 200 miles to Sweden. The Germans had Vemork up and running again within months, but the operation was extremely successful in angering the Nazis and slowing down their nuclear ambitions. In fact, the Germans were determined to track down and kill the team responsible for the explosion, but their efforts failed, and the recruits were never captured or harmed. Number 4. Operation Grief. At the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, Hitler commissioned commando leader Otto Skorzeny to run interference on and sabotage Allied communications and morale. Dubbed Operation Grief, the mission involved disguising English-speaking Germans in uniforms from captured American soldiers and sending them behind enemy lines with forged military documents. These undercover troops misdirected tank traffic, switched road signs around, destroyed ammunition dumps and telephone lines, and otherwise acted as a nuisance to Allied operations. And while they managed to spark some confusion and panic among U.S. forces, they failed to cause any serious damage. American soldiers eventually caught on to the scheme and spread the word to be on the lookout for the culprits. They quickly set up road checkpoints, where they quizzed passers-by on American sports and pop culture. Unfortunately, this led to the detention of genuine Allied troops who simply didn't follow these topics. But it also led to the capture of imposters, who tried to throw off the Americans by claiming that commandos were plotting to kill General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was put into protective housing out of concern for his safety. In the end, Operation Grief accomplished little more than posing an inconvenience to the Allied war effort. The lack of any major progress towards the Germans' objectives brought the operation to a standstill, and the Nazis ultimately withdrew the commandos. American forces continued to search for disguised Germans for several months before realizing that they were long gone. Number 3. The Ghost Army. The U.S. Army developed its first ever tactical deception unit, nicknamed the Ghost Army in 1944. Officially called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the top-secret unit consisted of 82 officers and 1,023 soldiers who spent the final year of the war tricking the Germans into believing that they were a 30,000-strong force. They accomplished this by using visual, sonic, and radio deception tactics. These clever combat con artists carried out 22 large-scale deceptions while armed only with 50 caliber machine guns. Due to the sophisticated nature of their work, most of the Ghost Army's members had backgrounds in art or engineering, or were professional soldiers. With an average IQ of 119, they were one of the most intelligent military groups of all time. Their tactics included using inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic and sound effects, and bogus generals. These methods worked incredibly well, effectively saving thousands of lives while essentially driving the Germans crazy. The Ghost Army's work was highly classified. Even after the war, members were sworn to secrecy, and the military went to great lengths to hide any trace of the unit. Its existence was revealed to the public in 1985, courtesy of Smithsonian Magazine, and the matter was officially declassified during the 90s. Number 2. Operation Aisha. By the time the Allies invaded Italy in 1943, much of the country's population saw themselves as already having lost the war. Shortly after the invasion, citizens voted their pro-Nazi and fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, out of power. He was expelled from office and arrested by the King of Italy. This deeply troubled Hitler, who believed it was crucial to keep Mussolini in power in order for Nazi Germany to continue receiving Italy's support in the war. He was correct. In fact, Italian officials had already agreed to meet with the Allies for secret peace talks, but he remained determined to keep Italy on his side. Hitler invaded northern Italy, effectively splitting the country in two, and set to work on a plan to rescue Mussolini from custody. In a mission codenamed Operation Aisha, also known as the Gran Sasso Raid, Hitler ordered Waffen-SS officer Otto Skorzeny to free Mussolini, affectionately nicknamed Il Duce, before he was turned over to the Allies. Skorzeny traced the deposed dictator's location to a remote ski resort in the Apennine Mountains and traveled there on gliders with a team of 16 SS troopers. They approached silently and stormed the property, overwhelming the guards with ease. After destroying the guards' radio equipment, the intruding team found Mussolini, who reportedly exclaimed, "I knew my friend Adolf Hitler would not leave me in the lurch." The entire raid took less than 10 minutes from start to finish, and not a single shot was fired. Skorzeny rushed Mussolini onto a plane and personally escorted him to Austria. Mussolini became the leader of a Nazi-backed puppet government in northern Italy. But by early 1945, the Allies were gaining a clear upper hand on the Italian peninsula. To avoid falling into the American or British hands, or risking being tried as a war criminal in his own country, Mussolini attempted to flee to neutral Switzerland with his mistress Clara Petacci. They encountered partisan forces at the border and were shot dead. The couple's killers made an example out of the pair by displaying their slain bodies in the streets of Milan, officially bringing the disgraced autocrat's reign to a much-celebrated end. Number 1. Operation Werewolf. In 1944, the losing Germans attempted to create a resistance force that would operate secretly behind enemy lines as part of a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war in their favor. Contrary to popular belief, this regiment of elite volunteers, codenamed Operation Werewolf, didn't operate in disguise or plain clothes. They were uniformed soldiers who were meant to operate similarly to Allied commandos. Headquartered in Berlin, the operations plan was to train recruits in guerrilla warfare tactics that the Nazis had observed among the Soviets in Ukraine and other captured territories. But things didn't go exactly according to plan. Rumors about the existence of a secret Nazi guerrilla force began to swirl shortly after the Allied invasion of Normandy in June of 1944. The following year, the notorious German politician Joseph Goebbels urged every German to fight to the death in what became known as the Werewolf Speech. By then, the Werewolf unit had already been partially dismantled, but propaganda continued to spread, primarily via a radio station called Radio Werewolf, which claimed that the Allies were planning to enslave German civilians. Much like Goebbels during his Werewolf speech, the broadcast called on the German people to stand their ground, even if it cost them their lives. After the war, former Nazi officers admitted that the Werewolf unit was inefficient and weak, and that it was led by an equally incompetent commander. In other words, it was never anywhere close to as powerful as it was chalked up to be, and had been a relative non-threat throughout the entirety of its existence.
Number 10. Gerald R. Ford Class, USA. The Gerald R. Ford Class aircraft carriers are some of the largest and most powerful warships ever made by the United States. These ships are about 1,106 feet long, 134 feet wide, and have a displacement weight of nearly 100,000 tons. This not only makes them the biggest vessels in the U.S. fleet, but also the largest in the entire world. Their flight decks measure 256 feet wide and 1,092 feet long, featuring 4 aircraft catapults and 4 advanced arresting gear systems. The aircraft launching systems are powered through electromagnetic energy, making them more advanced than the steam-powered launchers used on other ships. These state-of-the-art carriers have been designed to replace another giant of the seas, the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers that have been used by the U.S. military since 1975. These ships can carry up to 90 aircraft, including F-35C Lightning II Joint Strike Fighters, FA-18EF Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, MH-60RS helicopters, and unmanned aerial vehicles. The crew size for the vessels is approximately 4,500 sailors and officers, and the ships are powered with 2 nuclear reactors that can propel to speeds of over 30 knots. Building these ships is not exactly a small task. Starting construction in 2006, it took over 5,000 shipbuilders and suppliers from 46 states across the country to build the Ford aircraft carrier. It's amazing how many people it takes to create such a massive and complex ship. The first in the class, the USS Gerald R. Ford, was commissioned in July of 2017. The second ship, the future USS John F. Kennedy, is currently being built and should be finished sometime in 2024. The third ship, the future USS Enterprise, CVN-80, is also under construction with an unset launch date. Number 9. The Nimitz class, USA. The Nimitz class of aircraft carriers is a class of 10 nuclear-powered carriers currently in service with the United States Navy. The first of the class, the USS Nimitz, was officially commissioned in 1975, and the most recent, the USS George H.W. Bush, was built in 2009. The Nimitz-class carriers are some of the largest warships in the world, with displacement loads of over 100,000 tons. They're about 1,092 feet long and have a beam of 252 feet. They're powered by 2 nuclear reactors that let them operate continuously for over 20 years without needing to refuel. The ships can travel at speeds of over 30 knots and have a range of over 300,000 nautical miles. The carriers are designed to support multiple aircraft, including fighter jets, helicopters, and early warning and surveillance planes. The ships are outfitted with advanced radar and electronic warfare systems, along with multiple missile defense systems. The Nimitz-class carriers have played a key role in the U.S. military operations around the world, including the Persian Gulf War, the Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan. One of the largest deployments of the Nimitz-class carriers was the air campaign against Iraq, with ships like the USS Harry S. Truman and the USS George H.W. Bush participating in multiple deployments to the region. They are also frequently used for humanitarian and disaster relief efforts. Overall, the Nimitz-class carriers are crucial to U.S. naval power. Even though their replacement in the Gerald R. Ford class is starting to unfold, the Nimitz class is expected to stay in service for several more decades. Number 8. The Queen Elizabeth class, UK. The Queen Elizabeth class of aircraft carriers currently has 2 carriers in service with the British Royal Navy. The lead ship of the class, the HMS Queen Elizabeth, was commissioned back in 2017 and was followed by the HMS Prince of Wales in 2019. These carriers are the largest warships ever built for the British Royal Navy, with a full load displacement of over 65,000 tons and a length of 932 feet. They're powered by 2 gas turbines as well as 4 diesel generators, which offer a maximum speed of 25 knots and a range of up to 10,000 nautical miles. The carriers are designed to hold up to 40 aircraft, including the F-35B Lightning II, a 5th-generation multi-role fighter aircraft that's capable of vertical takeoff and landing. The carriers also have a range of sophisticated defense systems, including long-range radar, missile systems, and electronic warfare capabilities. One of the more interesting features of the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carriers is their modular design, meaning that their internal layout can be reconfigured to support many different mission requirements. This makes them flexible and adaptable for a range of operations. Some of the missions that this carrier has been involved with include a war against ISIS in the Middle East and extensive joint training operations with the U.S. Navy. The Queen Elizabeth-class carriers are part of a broader effort by the UK to modernize its armed forces and increase its power projection capabilities. The ships are expected to play a major role in the UK military operations for decades, including supporting NATO missions and providing humanitarian aid in times of need. Number 7. Admiral Kuznetsov, Russia. The Admiral Kuznetsov class of aircraft carriers consists of 2 heavy aircraft carrying cruisers used by the Russian Navy. The lead ship of its class, the Admiral Kuznetsov, was commissioned back in 1991, and the second ship, the Varyag, was never finished in its home country. It eventually was sold to China in 1998, where it was completed and commissioned as the Liao Ning. These ships are significantly smaller than the Nimitz and Queen Elizabeth classes, with smaller load displacements. They're powered by steam turbines and have a max speed of 29 knots. The carriers are designed to carry up to 40 vehicles, including fixed-wing fighters, helicopters, and anti-submarine aircraft. The Admiral Kuznetsov-class carriers have been the subject of heavy criticism, both in Russia and abroad, for their high operation costs, outdated technology, and maintenance issues. Admiral Kuznetsov, in particular, has been ridiculed after a number of accidents and operational issues, including a fire in 2019 that led to the death of one crew member and significant damage to the ship. Number 6. Liao Ning Type 001, China. The Liao Ning is China's first aircraft carrier and was commissioned in September of 2012. It was originally the Soviet-era vessel the Varyag, a Kuznetsov-class carrier that China bought from Ukraine in 1998. Acquiring the Liao Ning gave China valuable experience in carrier operations, as Chinese naval personnel had the ability to train and gain practical knowledge on the refurbished Soviet-era vessel. This experience has been used to develop China's own domestic carrier program, which ended in the commissioning of the Shandong, China's first domestically built aircraft carrier. The Liao Ning has a displacement of 55,000 tons and is about 990 feet long. It has a conventional propulsion system and can reach around 31 knots. The carrier can also carry 50 aircraft, including fighter jets, helicopters, and early warning aircraft. The Liao Ning has undergone extensive upgrades and modifications since it was purchased by China, including the installation of a ski jump ramp for launching aircraft and the addition of advanced radar, electronic warfare, and new missile systems. The Liao Ning has been involved in many exercises and training operations since it was commissioned, including joint exercises with other navies. It has also been involved in patrols and missions in the South China Sea and the Pacific. Have you ever been on an aircraft carrier yourself? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button while you're down there. Number 5. Shandong Type 002, China. China's first domestically built aircraft carrier, the Shandong, was built back in December 2019. It is the second aircraft carrier in China's fleet after the Liao Ning, a refurbished Soviet-era vessel. The Shandong is about 315 meters long, 1,033 feet, and it has a conventional propulsion system and can reach speeds of 31 knots. The carrier can carry up to 36 fighter jets and helicopters, including the J-15 fighter jet, which is a variant of the original Russian Su-33. The Shandong also features an advanced combat system that includes radar, electronic warfare, and even missile systems. It has a ski jump ramp for launching its aircraft and 3 elevators for moving vehicles between the hangar and the flight deck. It's been involved in multiple exercises and training operations in the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. In December of 2020, the Shandong carried out a series of live fire drills in the South China Sea, which included the launch of anti-ship missiles and the deployment of fighter jets. The Shandong has also played a role in joint exercises with other navies like the Russian Navy and has made port calls to countries including Cambodia, Thailand, and Brunei. Number 4. Fujian Type 003, China. Fujian is the newest aircraft carrier built by the Chinese Navy. The Type 003 vessel was first laid down in the water during 2016 and was launched in July of 2022. It's the second Chinese-built aircraft carrier in the PLAN, or People's Liberation Army Navy, after the Type 002 Shandong, which was modeled after the Type 001 Liao Ning, which we mentioned previously. Compared to the other two, the Fujian has much sleeker design, featuring a more streamlined and neater launch deck, yet still displacing 80,000 tons. Operating under conventional power, other factors about the ship are still unknown, although it's rumored that, like the U.S. Navy's new Gerald R. Ford-class carriers, the Fujian will leverage electromagnetic launching systems instead of steam-powered technology. As evidence of this, the Type 003 doesn't have a bow ramp and represents the Chinese Navy's transition towards catapult-assisted takeoff, but arrested recovery or CATOBAR operations. Although the recovery process has stayed unchanged, CATOBAR carriers use catapults to launch fixed-wing aircraft, which enables them to carry heavier fuel and weapons loads during takeoff process. CATOBAR ships have the capability to accommodate a greater variety of aircraft, including larger and slower non-fighter models like the KJ-600 carrier radar plane. As to how the Fujian will be used, it is likely that it will become a focal point of the People's Liberation Army Navy and will be accompanied by a strike group. This combination will be utilized to assert Chinese dominance overseas. In addition to expanding Beijing's ability to carry out military operations beyond its borders, the carrier is expected to serve as a significant symbol of China's naval strength. Number 3. The INS Vikramaditya, India. The INS Vikramaditya is an aircraft carrier serving in the Indian Navy. It is the largest warship operated by India and one of the few operational aircraft carriers in the entire region. The INS Vikramaditya was originally built as the Soviet Navy's Admiral Gorshkov-class aircraft carrier back in the 1980s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the ship was decommissioned and put up for sale. In 2004, India bought the vessel from Russia and started a massive overhaul and modernization program which lasted over a decade. The INS Vikramaditya is about 931 feet long. It has a mixed propulsion system that includes gas turbine and diesel generators, allowing it to reach speeds around 30 knots. The carrier can hold up to 30 fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, including the MiG-29K fighter jet. The INS Vikramaditya is equipped with modern radar and electronic warfare systems and features a ramp for launching aircraft. It also has advanced landing aids for recovering aircraft. Since 2013, the INS Vikramaditya has been involved in various exercises and operations, including exercises with the U.S. Navy and patrols in the Indian Ocean region. It is considered a key component of India's maritime security and power projection in the region. Number 2. The Charles de Gaulle, France. The Charles de Gaulle is a class of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers utilized by the French Navy. Currently, there is only one active ship in its class, the Charles de Gaulle, which was commissioned in 2001. The Charles de Gaulle has a displacement of 42,000 tons and is about 856 feet long. It has nuclear propulsion systems and can reach around 27 knots. The carrier can carry 40 fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, including the Rafale fighter jet and the E-2C Hawkeye early warning aircraft. The ship is equipped with advanced radar and electronic warfare systems, and it even features a catapult-assisted takeoff system for launching planes. It also has an arrestor wire system for recovering aircraft and a large hangar deck for storing aircraft and other vehicles. The Charles de Gaulle has been involved in various operations and missions since it was first commissioned, including support for NATO operations in Afghanistan and the fight against ISIS over in the Middle East. It also has participated in joint exercises with the U.S. Navy and the Indian Navy. The Charles de Gaulle is considered a key component of France's extensive military capabilities, particularly in its power projection. It is also one of the few operational nuclear-powered carriers in the world, which gives it a unique advantage in terms of endurance and rangeability. And at number 1, the INS Vikrant, India. The INS Vikrant is an upcoming aircraft carrier being constructed for the Indian Navy. It will be the first carrier built domestically in India and represents a significant step forward for India's Navy. The INS Vikrant will be about 859 feet long, and the ship will be powered by a gas turbine propulsion system. It's expected to have a top speed of around 28 knots. The carrier is designed to carry over 30 fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, including the Tejas fighter jet and the Ka-31 early warning helicopter. The INS Vikrant is being built with high-tech, modern technology and is equipped with advanced radar, electronic warfare, and communication systems. The carrier is expected to be fully integrated into the Indian Navy sometime during 2023 and will significantly enhance India's power projection capabilities in the region. The Vikrant will be the second aircraft carrier used by the Indian Navy after the INS Vikramaditya, and will help to maintain India's presence and influence in the Indian Ocean. It is also expected to play a key role in India's maritime security and international disaster relief efforts.
Number 8. The Caspian Sea Monster. The Korabl Maket, known informally as the Caspian Sea Monster, was developed by the Central Hydrofoil Design Bureau in the Soviet Union during the 1960s. It was an experimental ground effect vehicle that was primarily utilized by the Soviet Navy up until 1980, when the over 300-foot-long vessel finally crashed into the Caspian Sea. The surprise discovery of the KM by the US and the later attempts at figuring out its purpose became distinctive secret missions during the extreme period of geopolitical tension now known as the Cold War. And from 1966 to 1988, the Caspian Sea Monster was both the heaviest and largest aircraft in the world. The massive vehicle's first flight happened on October 16, 1966. It was performed by two men, Vladimir Loganov and Rostislav Alexeyev, the KM's chief designer. This was pretty unusual considering the fact that most aircraft designers from the Soviet Union never test drive their own projects. But apparently Alexeyev just couldn't resist the temptation. Further testing of the vehicle showed that it had a top cruising speed of 267 miles per hour, but it had a maximum operational speed of 311 miles per hour. There's been some sources that have claimed the Caspian Sea Monster could reach insane speeds of around 460 miles per hour, which is even more bizarre to think about since the vessel was roughly 1.2 million pounds. At first, the KM was seen as a promising vehicle that was specifically meant to be used by rescue workers and military officials, although its design caused far too many difficulties in the end. For 15 years, it was tested on the Caspian Sea, but in 1980, a pilot error caused it to crash, ultimately destroying it altogether. Luckily, there weren't any casualties. The KM was deemed far too heavy to be worthy of recovery, and so it's remained at its underwater crash site ever since. Number 7. USS Enterprise Aircraft Carrier. Once known as CVAN-65, the USS Enterprise is a decommissioned aircraft carrier that was formerly used by the United States Navy. Built in 1958, she was the 8th U.S. naval ship with the name. She was also the first ever nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in the entire world. Measuring a whopping 1,123 feet, she's the longest naval vessel ever built to this day, and the only ship of her class. The Enterprise's 94,781-ton displacement makes her class the third heaviest carrier class, coming in right after the Gerald R. Ford class and the Nimitz class. And when she was still in use, she typically had a crew of about 5,000 service members. In June 1962, Enterprise joined the U.S. Navy's Second Fleet on her first operational mission, completing training off the east coast of the United States. There, she participated in Exercise Lantflex 262, which was a covert nuclear strike exercise. And in August that same year, she met with the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean Sea before going back home to Norfolk, Virginia on October 11, 1962. Throughout her many years of service, Enterprise was involved with multiple military operations and exercises, like Operation Sea Orbit, the around-the-world cruise of the U.S. Navy's Task Force One that happened back in 1964. She also participated in Operation Frequent Wind in April 1975, which was the last phase in the evacuation of at-risk Vietnamese and American civilians from Saigon before the city was overtaken by the People's Army of Vietnam. During her inactivation, Enterprise was the third oldest commissioned ship in the U.S. Navy, after the wooden-hulled USS Pueblo and USS Constitution. On December 1, 2012, she was officially inactivated for good, and on February 3, 2017, after over 55 years of service, she was finally decommissioned. On that same day, she was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register. Number 6. Typhoon-class submarines. Under the Soviet designation Project 941 Akula, the Typhoon class is composed of nuclear-powered submarines designed and built by the Soviet Union for its navy. Typhoons are able to accommodate living facilities for about 160 crew members while submerged for months at a time. And with an incredible displacement of 48,000 tons, these submarines are the largest ever created. The Typhoon class is said to be named after General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev's common use of the word typhoon in his 1974 speech, where he described a brand new kind of nuclear ballistic missile submarine. This new vessel was launched in response to the newly built U.S. Navy's Ohio-class submarine. The 574-foot-long Typhoon class was equipped with 6 powerful torpedo tubes that were designed to handle Type 53 torpedoes, or RPK-2 missiles. In normal conditions, these submarines could stay submerged for an incredible 120 days, potentially even longer if it was necessary. Their main weapon system consisted of 20 R-39 ballistic missiles, each armed with a maximum of 10 MIRV nuclear warheads. And what's even more terrifying is that Typhoons could deploy their long-range missiles while still moored at docks. But in March 2012, the Russian Navy's Typhoon modernization program was canceled thanks to insufficient funding, and by September of that year, only one Typhoon-class submarine remained in service. It wasn't decommissioned until February 2023. Number 5. Panzerkampfwagen Maus. In March 1942, Friedrich Krupp AG, one of the world's leading arm manufacturers and steelmakers, was given a directive for the development of a brand new heavy tank. But who gave the order? Well, it was none other than Adolf Hitler himself. The tank was designated in the 100-ton class and was supposed to replace the previous concept of a 72-ton tank, which began in 1938, headed by Rheinmetall, a German-based automotive and arms manufacturer. They aimed to produce an operational trial vehicle in the shortest amount of time possible, and to be ready for its reveal by spring 1943. Just 2 weeks later, on March 21st, Dr. Ferdinand Porsche was handed a separate independent contract for the exact same thing, a 100-ton tank. In the end, the Nazis went with Porsche's design, marking the birth of the Panzerkampfwagen Maus. The 188-ton vessel was impractical to say the least. The timing of its introduction was quite strange as well. Shortly before, Germany had lost the oil fields in Africa and had started to run short on fuel for its vehicles, so announcing a gas-guzzling monster that would definitely be time-consuming and extremely expensive probably wasn't the best move. But regardless of how bad the timing was, Hitler gave the go-ahead on the Maus for mass production in 1943. The tank's main armament consisted of a 12.8-centimeter PaK-44 anti-tank gun, which could be loaded with 68 rounds. But the Maus was still missing a close combat armament, an issue that was later addressed and taken care of in the form of a short-range defensive ordnance that was able to be mounted on the turret roof. The heavy tank was intended to take practically no damage while punching holes through enemy fortifications, but Hitler's vision never made it to fruition. Only 2 Maus prototypes were ever created, and apparently, they were never even equipped with their proper weapons. One of these tanks is still intact though to this day, and is on display near Moscow at the Patriot Park Museum. Do you think it's okay for a country's military to spend millions of dollars on projects that don't even work out in the end? Or do you think it's a huge waste of money that should be given back to taxpayers? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. The Char 2C tank. Developed during the First World War, the Char 2C was a French heavy tank that was later given the designation of a super heavy tank. In physical dimensions and total volume, it was the largest operational tank ever made. Only 10 Char 2Cs were built, and they obtained quite the reputation from the public as being invincible. But French commanders at the time were well aware that this reputation was undeserved. The Char 2C's main armament consisted of a 105mm gun that had to be shortened to reduce its recoil so it could actually fit into a turret. At 69 tons, the tanks were very difficult to move, and steering problems made the heavy-tracked vehicles even harder to control. Even though it had an operational range of 93 miles, which is impressive, it had a max speed of only 9.3 miles per hour, leaving it susceptible to anti-tank guns. By June 1940, 4 of the tanks had already broken down and were destroyed. The 6 remaining Char 2Cs, on the other hand, received an order to be sent to Neufchâteau in northeastern France by train. On the way there, they ran into some tracks that were blocked by a fuel train on fire, making it impossible for the tanks to get unloaded. So in order to stop them from being captured by the enemy, the command was given to destroy them entirely. Number 3. Mil V12. Created by Mil Design Bureau in the 1960s, the 92-foot-long Mil V12 was, and still is, the largest helicopter ever built. It was a huge heavy-lift aircraft undertaken by the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Under the codename Homer, which it was given by NATO, V12 had its test flight in June 1967, but its first successful flight didn't happen until the next year. And despite how promising the project seemed, the V12 was simply never meant to be, since production of the vehicle was cancelled after only 2 prototypes were completed. The Soviet Union tried making a helicopter capable of lifting 55,000 pounds of cargo, and in the end, they successfully exceeded that goal. In July 1968, the V-12's first prototype lifted an incredible 97,455 pounds of cargo to a height of 7,398 feet, ultimately setting a new world record. But despite the helicopter's achievements, the Soviet Air Force refused the V-12 for several reasons. Ultimately, operating costs were way too high to be justified. The procurement of materials to build the craft were hard to come by, and with the Soviet mission starting to change, the helicopter lost its defined role. As a result, the V-12 program was shut down entirely in 1974. Number 2. Lockheed C-5M Super Galaxy. With a wingspan of over 222 feet and a length of 143 feet, the C-5M Super Galaxy is currently the biggest aircraft owned by the U.S. Air Force. Produced in the late 1960s by Lockheed Martin, its objective is to transport personnel and cargo for the Department of Defense. The C-5M is equipped with 28 total wheels, 5 sets of landing gear, a state-of-the-art maintenance diagnostic system, and 4 General Electric F-138 engines. It's capable of carrying oversized cargo overseas and can easily take off and land on short runways. Both the aft and nose doors of the craft are able to be opened, allowing ground crews to load and offload cargo from each end simultaneously, ultimately reducing cargo transfer times. The C-5M also has drive-on ramps at each side, which enables 2 rows of vehicles to be carried. And amazingly, the Super Galaxy can fly 2,150 nautical miles, carrying 281,001 pounds, offload, and then without even refueling, it can make it to a second base another 500 nautical miles away from its first destination. Number 1. Wasp Class LHD. The Wasp class of LHD amphibious assault ships are used by the U.S. Navy. LHD is short for Landing Helicopter Dock, which is just what it sounds like. The Wasp class is capable of carrying basically the full strength of a U.S. Marine Corps Marine Expeditionary Unit, and can get them to hostile territory via helicopters or landing craft. These vessels also provide air support through F-35B Lightning II stealth strike fighters or AV-8B Harrier II attack aircraft. Built in the city of Pascagoula, Mississippi by Ingalls Shipbuilding, the lead ship of this class, the USS Wasp, was first commissioned on July 29, 1989, and is still in active service today. With a displacement of 41,150 tons and a length of 843 feet, the ship was designed to allow for the operation of landing craft air cushion hovercraft and AV-8B Harrier II aircraft, marking the first time a vessel was specifically designed to operate them. On its 266 by 50-foot deck, the LHD can carry 40 total amphibious assault vehicles, 12 landing craft mechanized, 3 landing craft air cushion, and another 21 AAVs on the vehicle deck. The vessel's flight deck consists of 9 helicopter landing spots and can operate tilt rotors and helicopters as big as the Sikorsky CH-53E Super Stallion, which is 99 feet long and weighs over 33,000 pounds. Now that's a big ship. If you could test drive any of these military vehicles for a day, which one would you choose? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!